For Alara, the library wasn't a refuge of quiet stories. It was a vault of silent grief, a monument to the life she thought she'd have. She thought her world was permanently closed, like the books she reshelved. Until the day the three little girls handed her a folded piece of paper. It was an invitation to Thanksgiving dinner, and tucked inside it was a secret their father was too heartbroken to say out loud. Alara was the town's quiet librarian, a keeper of stories who believed her own had ended 2 years ago on a rain-slicked highway. The man with the three little girls was Leo, a single father who came every Thursday, his smile never reaching the sadness in his eyes. He was fighting a battle no one could see, and his daughters, in their innocent wisdom, decided to launch a secret rescue mission. What was in that sealed letter she carried to their door? And why would its truth change everything for all of them on that one Thanksgiving? The story really begins in the quiet aisles of the Willow Creek Public Library, a place where time moved differently, measured in due dates and turning pages. For Alara Vance, every day was a careful performance of normalcy. She arrived at 9, sorted returns, helped patrons, and left at 6. The other librarians saw a dedicated, if quiet, colleague. They didn't see the woman who sat in her car for 10 minutes every morning, steeling herself to face a world of families and happy endings. Her grief was 2 years old, but it was a fresh wound every single day. Her husband, Ben, was gone, and with him the future they'd planned. The children, the noise, the chaotic, beautiful life vanished into silence. Leo Marsh and his daughters were a fixture. Every Thursday after school, the three blonde tornadoes in matching outfits would burst through the doors, their energy momentarily disrupting the hush. They'd make a beeline for the children's section, and Leo would follow, a tired but patient shadow. He'd let them pick out 7 books each because that was their rule, 21 books every week. Alara had noticed him from the start, not because he was handsome, though he was, in a worn flannel, messy hair kind of way. She noticed because he looked how she felt, hollowed out, performing a role. His smiles for his girls were genuine, but when he thought no one was looking, his face would go still, his eyes distant, fixed on some internal horizon of pain. She learned his name from his library card, Leo Marsh. She learned the girls were triplets, 6 years old, named Sophie, Chloe, and Zoe. They were a unit, a package deal, and it was clear they were his entire world. What she didn't know was why he was alone. No wedding ring, no mention of a mother. It was a mystery she quietly cataloged but never pursued. Her own pain was enough. She didn't need to borrow his. But the girls had other plans. Children see gaps in the universe that adults have learned to ignore. They saw the sadness in their father's eyes when he thought they were asleep. They saw the lonely woman at the library who had a kind voice but never any visitors in the children's section. One afternoon, while Leo was distracted helping Zoe find a book on dinosaurs, Sophie, the most observant of the three, whispered to her sisters a plan, a secret mission. They would invite the library lady to Thanksgiving. They would give her the letter. The letter was the heart of the mystery. Leo had written it months ago, in a fit of desperate loneliness after a particularly hard day. He typed it out on his phone, a raw, unvarnished truth he could never say aloud. It explained everything. How his wife, Clara, their mother, had left when the girls were 2, overwhelmed by the chaos and the responsibility, leaving a note and a void he could never fill. How he'd struggled since, working 2 jobs, a daytime construction foreman and nighttime freelance drafting, to keep them afloat. How he was terrified he was failing them, that his love wasn't enough to make up for the absence of a mother. How he saw Alara, and in her quiet strength he saw a reflection of the loneliness he carried. He'd never intended to send it. It was just a note in his phone, a digital scream into the void. But Sophie, savvy beyond her years, had seen him writing it once. She'd memorized his password, found the note, and printed it out. She didn't understand all the words, but she understood the feeling. Daddy was sad. The library lady was sad. They should not be sad alone on Thanksgiving. The Thursday before Thanksgiving, the plan went into action. Leo was at the counter, checking out the usual mountain of books. The girls huddled by the biography section. As Alara handed Leo his receipt, Sophie walked up, her face a mask of solemn purpose. She held out a folded piece of construction paper, decorated with turkey drawings made from traced little hands. "This is for you," Sophie said. "It's an invitation. You have to come." Before Alara could even process it, the girls had bundled their father toward the door, a flurry of autumn-colored dresses and giggles. Alara was left holding the paper. She opened it. In wobbly crayon, it read, "You are invited to Thanksgiving dinner at our house, 4 o'clock. Love, Sophie, Chloe, and Zoe." A phone number was scribbled at the bottom. Her first instinct was to decline, to make an excuse. Thanksgiving was a landmine of memories. But something in the earnestness of those crayon turkeys, in the hopeful eyes of those little girls, made her pause. She tucked the invitation into her cardigan pocket. It felt like a secret. Leo had no idea. The girls had executed their mission with 6-year-old precision. When he found out, it was panic. He called the number on the invitation, which was, of course, his own number placed there by Sophie to make it look official. A confused, stammering conversation followed. Alara, touched by the gesture but sensing his acute embarrassment, tried to let him off the hook. "It's so sweet, really, but you don't have to." Leo, caught between mortification and the shining, expectant faces of his daughters, heard himself saying, "No, please. They'd be heartbroken if you didn't come. We'd love to have you." The die was cast. Thanksgiving Day arrived, gray and drizzly. Alara stood on the porch of a modest, well-kept ranch house, holding a pie in one hand and the sealed envelope containing Leo's printed, unsent letter in the other. The girls had given her a final instruction when she'd called to confirm. "Bring the secret letter for Daddy." They believed it was a gift. She had no idea she was holding a man's fragile, naked truth. She knocked. The door flew open and she was engulfed by the smell of roasting turkey and the sound of childish shrieks. Leo appeared, wiping his hands on an apron that said "Kiss the Cook," looking more terrified than she felt. But then he saw the envelope in her hand. His face drained of color. He recognized the plain white envelope. He knew exactly what it was. Before he could speak, Sophie chirped, "Daddy, she brought your letter, the one from your phone." In that moment, Leo Marsh's carefully constructed world split right down the middle. The chaos of a child's Thanksgiving party froze into a perfect, silent tableau. Leo stood on one side of the threshold, his expression a wreck of shock and dawning horror. Alara stood on the porch, the envelope feeling suddenly radioactive in her hand. The girls, sensing the shift in the air, went quiet behind their father. "My letter," Leo finally managed, his voice barely a whisper. Sophie, from behind his legs, piped up, "The sad one from your phone, Daddy. We gave it to her so you wouldn't be lonely." The revelation was a grenade. Leo's private despair, his digital scream, had been printed, packaged, and delivered as a party favor by his own children. Alara's librarian mind connected the dots instantly. The embarrassed phone call, his perpetual tiredness, the way he devoured parenting books in the library's quiet corners. This wasn't just a sweet invitation, it was a distress signal launched from the hearts of 3 little girls. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Alara said gently, her own social anxiety eclipsed by his palpable panic. "Perhaps I should just give this to you and go." She extended the envelope. Leo didn't move. He was trapped. If he took it and she left, the girls would be devastated. If she stayed, she held his naked confession. The smell of burning pie crust wafted from the kitchen. "The pie," Chloe yelled, breaking the spell. Leo jolted into motion, turning to sprint for the oven. In the flurry, Alara stepped inside and closed the door. She was in. What followed was the most awkward, poignant, and strangely beautiful Thanksgiving either had ever experienced. The girls, blissfully unaware of the tectonic plates shifting between the adults, were in heaven. They had a guest. They chattered endlessly, showing Alara their room, their toys, their turkey handprint centerpieces. Leo, flustered, focused on the mechanics of the meal, carving the turkey, mashing potatoes, rescuing the slightly scorched apple pie. Alara helped, setting the table, finding the gravy boat. They moved around each other in the small kitchen like asteroids in a shared orbit, careful not to collide. Conversation was polite, brittle, and entirely focused on the children. The unopened envelope sat on the mantelpiece like a sleeping dragon. Dinner was a noisy, joyful affair led by the triplets. Under the cover of their chatter, Alara saw the reality of Leo's life. The house was clean but lived in, toys in baskets, drawings on the fridge. There were no signs of a woman's touch, just the practical, loving chaos of a man doing his absolute best. She saw the dark circles under his eyes, the way his hands, rough from construction work, were so gentle when he cut Zoe's meat. Her own grief, a heavy, solitary stone, began to feel different. Not lighter, but shared in a way. Here was another person carrying a colossal weight. When the pumpkin pie was served, Sophie delivered the final, devastating blow of the evening. "Okay, Daddy, now you have to read your letter to everyone, that's the game." Leo's fork clattered onto his plate. Alara held her breath. He looked at his daughter's expectant faces, then at Alara, a stranger who held his vulnerability in her hands. He had a choice: shatter the girl's perfect Thanksgiving fantasy or expose his soul. He took a deep, shuddering breath. "Okay, Bug," he said, his voice thick. "But maybe just for me and our guest. You three have heard all my stories." With a theatrical groan, the girls agreed, racing off to the living room to watch a cartoon. The silence they left behind was deafening. Leo stood, walked to the mantel, and picked up the envelope. He didn't open it, he just held it. "I wrote this after Chloe broke her arm last year," he said, not looking at her. "It was 2 in the morning. I'd just gotten home from the emergency room. She was finally asleep, hopped up on pain meds. I was sitting at this very table, looking at the medical bills I knew would take me a year to pay off, and I just broke. I typed it on my phone. I never meant for anyone to see it, especially not you." He finally met her eyes. "You lost your husband. I read about it in the local paper when it happened. My problems, they must seem so small to you." That he knew about Ben was a shock that reverberated through her. He'd known her tragedy all along. It changed everything. "Grief isn't a competition, Leo," she said softly. "There's no smaller loss." He nodded, a muscle ticking in his jaw. Then he did the bravest thing. He slid the letter from the envelope, unfolded it, and began to read it aloud. His voice was low, unsteady at first, then gaining a raw strength. He read about the loneliness that hit him in the grocery store checkout line, when he saw other couples debating what to make for dinner. He read about the terror of failing, of not being enough mother and father combined. He read about the crushing financial pressure, the fear that his girls would grow up feeling lacking because he was just one man, stretched too thin. He read about seeing Alara at the library, a quiet island of calm, and wondering how she carried her own quiet sadness. "You seem like someone who understands the weight of silence," he read, his voice finally cracking. He put the paper down. The confession hung in the air between them, fragile and immense. Lara was silent for a long moment. She saw not a struggling single father, but a man of profound courage. He showed up every day for his girls. That letter wasn't a confession of weakness. It was a map of his love, drawn in the ink of fear. "Thank you," she said finally, "for trusting me with that." Then she offered a piece of her own truth. "The silence, it is heavy. This is the first Thanksgiving I haven't spent completely alone since Ben died. So thank your girls for me. They're remarkable." A bridge was built in that moment, not of romance, but of profound mutual recognition. The evening ended with promises to return the borrowed serving dish, a standard small-town excuse to see each other again. As Alara drove home, the empty passenger seat beside her didn't feel as accusing as it usually did. Her mind was full of the girls' laughter, of Leo's raw honesty, of the surprising lack of pity she felt, and instead, a feeling of resonance. The following week, the dynamic at the library shifted. It was subtle. When Leo and the girls came in on Thursday, there was a new, quiet understanding in his glance, a thank you for her discretion. The girls, however, were not subtle. "When are you coming over again?" Zoe demanded. "We have Christmas decorations to put up." Alara found herself agreeing to help with the decorating the following weekend. It felt less like a pity obligation and more like a thread pulling her forward. But this is where the first major pivot happens. This isn't just a sweet story about two lonely people, because Leo's world was far more precarious than a heartfelt letter could reveal. The real stakes were about to crash through the door. That Friday, while Alara was helping Leo untangle a hopeless knot of Christmas lights on his front porch, a sleek silver sedan pulled up to the curb. A woman got out. She was impeccably dressed, her blonde hair a sharp contrast to the girl's messy waves. She had their same nose, their same blue eyes. Clara, the mother who had left. She stood there, a cooler, more polished version of the chaos on the porch, and said, "Hello, Leo. I think we need to talk about the girls." The look on Leo's face wasn't surprise or anger. It was sheer, unadulterated terror. The world narrowed to that patch of porch, the tang of pine needles from the box of decorations, and the woman at the curb who was both a ghost and a very real present danger. Leo's hands, which had been gently untangling lights, clenched into fists at his sides. The color drained from his face. "Girls," he said, his voice strained but calm, "go inside and wash up for a snack. Now, please." Sensing the shift in their father's tone, the triplets obeyed without argument, filing past him with wide eyes, stealing glances at the stranger who looked familiar in a way they couldn't place. Clara approached, her heels clicking on the walkway. She didn't look at Alara. Her focus was entirely on Leo. "You look tired," she said, not unkindly. "I've been trying to call. You changed your number." "What do you want, Clara?" Leo's voice was flat, a defensive wall slammed down. Alara felt like an intruder on a private war. She began to slowly coil the string of lights. "I think it's obvious. I want to see my daughters. I want to be in their lives." Leo let out a short, bitter laugh. 4 years. Radio silence for 4 years, and now you just appear. No, you don't get to do that. Here was the first major revelation. Clara hadn't just walked out on a difficult life. She had vanished completely. No calls, no cards, no child support. According to the letter, she'd left a note saying she couldn't do it, that she was sorry, and that was it. She'd legally abandoned them. "I wasn't ready then," Clara said, her composure cracking slightly. "I was in a bad place, Leo. You know that. I'm better now. I'm stable. I have a good job in the city. I can provide for them." The word provide hung in the air, a direct challenge to Leo's constant financial strain. This was the wait, it gets worse moment. This wasn't just an emotional ambush. It was a potential legal and physical upheaval of everything the girls knew. Alara, the silent observer, saw the trap. Clara looked put together, successful. Leo looked like exactly what he was, a overworked, underslept single father, in a family court whose lifestyle would seem more stable on paper. The fear in Leo's eyes confirmed he was thinking the same thing. "You can't just waltz back in and play mom," he said, but the defiance was edged with desperation. "We need to talk, Leo, properly." "Without an audience," Clara said, finally flicking a glance at Alara that was neither friendly nor hostile. It was dismissive. She was scenery. Alara took the cue. "I should go," she said, placing the half-coiled lights back in the box. Leo looked at her, a silent plea in his eyes. Don't leave me to face this alone, but he couldn't ask, not after everything. She gave him a small, reassuring nod, a promise of "I'm not gone," and walked to her car. As she drove away, she saw in her rearview mirror Clara following Leo into the house, into the sanctuary he'd built for his girls. The cozy Thanksgiving scene had just been invaded. The next week at the library was agony. Leo didn't come on Thursday. The girls didn't burst through the doors. The silence in the children's section was deafening. Alara fought the urge to call. This was a family matter, and she was, officially, just the librarian. But her mind wouldn't stop. She researched. Quietly, during her breaks, she looked up state laws on parental abandonment and custody. The news was not good for Leo. A parent who left could petition for reunification and visitation rights, especially if they could demonstrate changed circumstances. The courts favored keeping children connected to both parents, even flawed ones. Leo's sole custody was based on abandonment, but it wasn't absolute. It could be challenged. Finally, a week later, Leo came alone. He looked hollowed out, like he hadn't slept in days. He found her shelving books in the history section. "Can we talk? Somewhere not here," he asked. They went to a small, quiet park bench around the corner. He told her everything. Clara had been diagnosed with severe postpartum depression, compounded by anxiety after the triplets were born. It had gone untreated, festering in the chaos of 3 infants. The day she left, she'd had what he now understood was a psychotic break. She'd driven to another state and checked herself into a hospital under a different name. She spent the last 4 years in and out of treatment, rebuilding herself. She was now medicated, in therapy, and by all accounts healthy, and she wanted a second chance. "She's not the monster I made her out to be in my head," Leo admitted, rubbing his face. "But that doesn't change what the girls went through, what I went through. They don't remember her, Alara. To them, she's a story, a photo. If she comes in and out, if she disappoints them, I can't let them get hurt again." The stakes had just been completely reframed. This wasn't a story about a villainous mother. It was a tragedy of mental illness, recovery, and the devastating collateral damage left in its wake. Who was the right party now? The mother who had healed, or the father who had held the fort through the war? And came the second, more brutal revelation. "She has a lawyer," Leo said, his voice hollow. "They're talking about filing for modified custody, starting with weekends. She's citing my precarious financial situation and lack of a support network as factors detrimental to the girl's stability." The attack was multifaceted: emotional legitimacy, legal pressure, and exploiting his one true vulnerability, that he was doing it all alone. Clara had a family, a new partner. Leo had no one. Until very recently. Alara's mind, trained for research and problem-solving, clicked into gear. The emotional heart of the story was now wrapped in a cold, hard legal shell. This was a battle, and Leo was unarmed. "What do you need?" she asked simply. He looked at her, surprised. I don't know, a miracle, a time machine." "You need a character witness," Alara said, thinking aloud. "You need documentation of your stability, of the home you've provided. You need to show the court that the girls are thriving, not just surviving. And you need to demonstrate that you do have a support network." She paused, the implication clear. She was offering to be part of that network, not as a romantic partner, but as a credible, stable adult who could attest to his character. This was the pivot from passive sympathy to active alliance. Alara was no longer just a witness to Leo's struggle. She was stepping onto the battlefield. She helped him find a family law attorney through a local legal aid group. She began formally documenting the girls' routines, their school projects, the happy, chaotic life of their home, creating a counterfile to Clara's narrative of instability. The girls, confused but resilient, were caught in the middle. They met their mother now, a few supervised times at a neutral playground. They were curious, intrigued, but also deeply loyal to their dad. "Why does that lady want to take us on trips?" Sophie asked one afternoon at the library, her brow furrowed. "Daddy says we have trips here." The tension reached its peak when Clara's lawyer formally filed the motion for visitation rights, with a request for a family court evaluator to assess both homes. The evaluator, a stern woman named Dr. Evans, would be visiting Leo's house in 1 week. The entire future would hinge on that visit. Leo was a wreck. The pressure to perform, to present a picture of perfect stability, was crushing him. The house had to be spotless, the girls perfectly behaved, his life orderly and calm. A complete fiction that betrayed the loving, messy reality that actually worked. The night before the evaluation, it all fell apart. Leo, exhausted from a double shift and frantic cleaning, snapped at the girls over a spilled glass of milk. A huge fight erupted, tears were shed, and all 3 girls were sent to their rooms upset. Leo sat at the kitchen table, his head in his hands, convinced he had just lost everything. He called Alara, not knowing what else to do. She heard the despair in his voice. Without a second thought, she drove over. She didn't come to clean or to coach. She came and made hot chocolate. She went upstairs and, with a quiet, calm voice, soothed the girls, telling them their dad was just very tired and loved them very much. She didn't try to fix the performance. She helped restore the truth, that this was a family, and families sometimes fought and made up. Watching her with his daughters, seeing the way they calmed for her, Leo had a realization that cut through the panic. The evaluator wasn't coming to see a perfect show. She was coming to see a real home. And the most real, stable thing in his life right now wasn't a clean floor. It was the fact that when he was at his breaking point, someone had shown up. Someone reliable. Alara was no longer just part of his support network. She had become its cornerstone. As they sat at the quiet kitchen table after the girls were asleep, the weight of the impending judgment hanging over them, Leo looked at Alara, this woman who had entered his life through a crayon invitation and was now holding it together by sheer will. "No matter what happens tomorrow," he said, his voice raw with emotion, "thank you for seeing me, not the mess, but me." It was a moment of profound connection, forged in crisis, but the crisis was far from over. The next morning, Dr. Evans would ring the doorbell, and the fight for their future would begin in earnest. The doorbell rang at 10 a.m. sharp, a sound that felt less like a chime and more like a starting pistol for the most important race of Leo's life. Dr. Evans was a woman in her 50s with a kind but unreadable face and a notebook that seemed to absorb the entire room. The house was clean, but not sterile. There was a Lego spaceship on the coffee table and a smudge of peanut butter on the kitchen cabinet that Leo had missed. The girls, coached to be on their best behavior, were initially stiff and quiet, which was entirely unlike them. Leo was a polite, nervous wreck. Alara was there not as a girlfriend or a partner, but as what she was, a family friend and community member. She had come to read with the girls, a normal Thursday morning activity. Her presence was calm, natural. She didn't perform or ingratiate herself. She simply was. Dr. Evans observed everything. She watched Leo help Zoe sound out a difficult word. She watched Sophie proudly show her latest school project. She watched Chloe, the most sensitive, cling to her father's leg for a moment before running off to play. She saw the drawings on the fridge, the chore chart, the well-stocked pantry. She saw a home. The turning point came during a simple question. Dr. Evans asked Sophie, "What do you like best about your family?" Sophie, without hesitation, said, "We're a team. Daddy is the captain and we're the crew, and sometimes Miss Alara is like our first mate." It was an innocent, profound statement. It showed security, unity, and an expanded sense of support. It was the truth, not a performance. Leo's eyes met Alara across the room, and in that glance was a world of gratitude. Dr. Evans simply nodded and wrote in her notebook. The wait for the evaluator's report was an agony of silence that stretched for 3 weeks. Leo and Clara attended mediation sessions that were tense but civil. Clara was not a monster. She was a woman seeking redemption, but the clock she was trying to turn back had moved on without her. The girls had a life, a rhythm, a foundation. Finally, the recommendation arrived, followed by a hearing before a family court judge. The courtroom was a place of cold wood and echoing voices, the antithesis of Leo's warm, messy living room. The judge, a thoughtful woman with silver hair, reviewed Dr. Evans's report. The recommendation was nuanced, recognizing Clara's recovery and sincere desire to reconnect, but prioritizing the children's established stability. The judge spoke plainly. The parent who stays, who does the daily work, who builds the home, that matters. Stability isn't just about income. It's about emotional permanence. The ruling was a compromise, but one that heavily favored Leo. Clara was granted supervised, therapeutic visitation rights, 1 weekend a month, to slowly and carefully build a relationship with the girls under the guidance of a child therapist. Full custody remained unequivocally with Leo. Any petition for expanded visitation would require another review in a year, contingent on consistency and the girls' emotional well-being. It was a victory, but a bittersweet one. It protected the girls, but it also formalized the fractured reality of their family. Leo walked out of the courthouse feeling not triumphant, but overwhelmingly relieved. The fortress was secure. In the aftermath, life began to reshape itself around this new normal. Clara became a scheduled, supervised part of their lives, a fact the girls gradually absorbed. Alara's role evolved organically. She wasn't a replacement mother, she was something else, a trusted adult, a friend, a steady presence. She and Leo grew closer, their bond forged in the fire of that crisis. It was a slow, careful thing, built on friendship and mutual respect first. They started having dinner together every Sunday, a tradition the girls dubbed library night, even though it was at their house. Then came the final, surprising detail. One Sunday, about 6 months after the court ruling, Clara asked to speak with Alara alone after dropping the girls off from a visitation. Leo was tense, protective, but Alara agreed. They met at a coffee shop. Clara, no longer an imposing figure but a woman who looked as tired as Leo once had, said, "I want to thank you." Alara was taken aback. Clara continued, "I read the evaluator's report. She noted your presence as a stabilizing factor for the girls. For him, I resented you at first, but then I saw how you look at them. You're not trying to be me. You're just there for them, in a way I couldn't be then. So thank you for being what they needed when I was." It was an astonishing moment of grace and painful self-awareness. The two women, connected by the same children, found a fragile peace not as rivals but as parts of a complicated whole. A year later, on a crisp autumn Thursday, the scene in the Willow Creek Public Library was both the same and utterly transformed. Alara was at her desk, but she wasn't steeling herself against the world. Leo and the girls burst in, now 7 years old and even more energetic. They ran to her, not just to get books, but to show her their latest drawings, to tell her about school. Leo followed, his eyes no longer hollow, just tired in a normal, parent of triplets way. He smiled at her, a real, easy smile. As the girls raced to the shelves, he slid a small, folded piece of construction paper across the desk to her. It was decorated with traced hand turkeys. "Another invitation?" Alara asked, laughing. "Open it," he said. Inside, in the girls' wobbly writing, it read, "You are invited to Thanksgiving dinner, again, but this time it's not a secret. Love, Sophie, Chloe, Zoe, and Daddy." And below that, in Leo's neat print, "P.S. This year, the only letter I'm writing is this one, and it just says, 'Thank you for staying.'" The story that began with a secret letter delivered in innocence ended with an open invitation, written in gratitude. Alara's vault of silent grief had been opened, not emptied, but filled with new, different, joyful noise. Leo's lonely battle had gained an ally, a friend, and perhaps the beginning of something more. The girls got what they'd wanted all along, a little less sadness at their Thanksgiving table. They had, in their 6-year-old wisdom, orchestrated a rescue mission for two adults who didn't know they needed saving. And in doing so, they didn't just rewrite a Thanksgiving. They gently, stubbornly, rewrote two broken stories into one of slow, steadfast healing. So what can we take from this quiet story that began with a crayon turkey and a sealed letter? It's a reminder that the people around us, the ones we see every day in the most ordinary places, are often fighting silent wars we know nothing about. The quiet librarian, the tired single dad, even the mother who seemed like a villain, each carried a hidden weight. This story isn't about a dramatic rescue. It's about showing up. It's about three little girls who, with the pure logic of children, saw two broken pieces and decided to push them together. They didn't fix the cracks. They just helped the light get in. Alara thought her story had ended. Leo believed he had to write his alone. But our lives aren't solitary books on a shelf. We're a library. And sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones we co-author with others, often with the most unexpected co-writers. The greatest courage isn't always in the grand gesture. It's in the vulnerability of accepting a handwritten invitation, in the bravery of reading your own painful truth out loud, in the simple, steadfast act of staying. So here's my question for you. Look around your own world. Who is the quiet person in your periphery who might be carrying a silent weight? Could a small, unexpected act of connection, a smile, a coffee, an invitation, be the secret letter they didn't know they needed? Or perhaps you've been the one who needed that kindness. How did it find you? If this story of fragile hope and stubborn healing resonated with you, if it reminded you that families and love can be built in the most unexpected ways, then do this for me. Tap that like button. It tells the algorithm that stories with heart still matter. Share this video with one person who needs to hear that they aren't alone in their struggle. And most importantly, subscribe and ring that notification bell. Because we have so many more true, human stories like this one to share with you. Stories that don't just pass the time, but that might just change the way you see the world and the people in it. Thanks for watching. And remember, the next chapter of someone's life might just begin with the kindness you choose to offer today. See you in the next story.